All right, Teddy Roosevelt and American diplomacy. I love that. I wish we'd stop doing that. The lean. The lean is mean. Okay. So, Teddy Roosevelt and American diplomacy. Basically, Teddy Roosevelt, an American lion, is you got to ask, does the man make the time or do the times make the man? And Teddy Roosevelt is an excellent example of I have no idea which, because he was an unstoppable machine. Now, first, before we get to talk about him, we got to talk about America and where it was kind of when he was growing up. Now, diplomatically, Prelude International View of America. In 1880, the ruler of Turkey was going to close his embassies in some of the minor countries. These minor countries included places like Sweden, Belgium, and, oh yeah, the United States of America. Now, little did he realize that within a few short years, we would join the power broker nations of Britain and France, and in a few years, almost exceeding the productive capabilities of Britain. Ready for the next slide? Diplomacy after the Civil War. Okay, antebellum American diplomacy. At the end of the Civil War, America has the largest and best trained army in the world. But we don't do anything with it. Basically, the rest of the world, can go to the dark place because we considered ourselves an island of democracy with the Atlantic Ocean on one side, the Pacific Ocean on the other side. These things were keeping all the rest of the world away. We could just focus on ourselves and our own domestic affairs. Now, guys, maybe after the Civil War that was so violent and brutal, we're kind of licking our wounds. Ready for the next slide? Now, to show our hesitancy to get out of ourselves, you have like free security tested in 1861. According to the Monroe Doctrine, the Western Hemisphere was supposed to be a Europe-free zone. But in late 1861, France, Spain, and Britain all sent troops to Mexico to get their loans paid off. Well, Mexico paid them the money, and Spain and Britain left, but France didn't. Indeed, France took control of key places in Mexico and put in their own guy, Austrian Duke Maximilian, as emperor. Now, how come America did nothing? This was in late 1861. How come America didn't do anything? Huh? Well, we had said with the Monroe Doctrine, it said Europeans we're going to get mad. Was anything going on in America from like 1861 to 1865?
Civil War?
Yeah, that whole Civil War thing where we almost killed ourselves. Yeah, that whole thing of us fighting for our lives. And basically, as the war was coming to an end, and we kind of told France, in late 1864, we told France, I'd really get out of here if I were you. And the Union even carried out some expeditions in South Texas, even though the Confederacy won. But France got the hint, and they packed up their bags and hustle-bucked back to France, leaving Maximilian in power, but without the French backing, he was captured and executed. Next slide. Now, after the Civil War, in about 1867, the Russian minister to America tells us, hey, Tsar Nicholas II wants to get rid of his North American territory. You interested? And William Seward said, sure. So in 1868, we purchased Alaska from the Russians for the price of $7.2 million, which was 2.5 cents an acre for 586,400 square miles, which was about twice the size of Texas. Well, did America think this was a great deal? No. They declared it Seward's folly. You know, oh, it's only ice up there anyway. Then Seward wanted to insure a naval base in Santo Domingo and buy a part of the Danish West Indies, both of which failed to win support. And then in 1870, Santo Domingo said, hey, America, take us. We want to be annexed by you. Well, that failed to win a 2/3 majority. It ended up in an even tie of 28 to 28 in the Senate. So that fell apart too. Even though we added a new corollary to the Monroe Doctrine that said that no territory of the Western Hemisphere could ever be transferred to a European power. So that's one of those, well, even though we don't want it, nobody else can have it. You ready? Now, expansion in the Pacific. Americans have been interested in the Pacific for many years. Indeed, in 1844, we signed a treaty with China that gave us the most favored nation status. This basically means that we put the lowest tariffs against you, and in return, y'all put your lowest tariffs against us. And we really tried to push China for an open door policy that would allow international access to trade and development in China. In 1854, under Commodore Matthew C. Perry, basically we push our gunboats into Tokyo Harbor, forcing them to see us, and we sign a treaty with them. They had historically been very, very isolationistic. But to kind of show you the genius of the Japanese, even though they were isolationists and just like barely coming out of the medieval, we gave them a working toy train, steam engine, that was like 3 feet long, you know, and the track and everything like that. Well, the Japanese basically undid it and re-engineered it on a huge, massive scale, making one of the world's best locomotives at the time, that was able to have a lot of power and go up grades, which means how steep something is up, which is very difficult for a locomotive to do. Meanwhile, we got Hawaii. In 1842, Tyler said that we wouldn't allow any other nation to claim it. And in 1874, King Kaluka rose to power, and he came over to the U.S. to talk a trade agreement with us about sugar, making him the first foreign monarch to ever visit the United States. And basically they were able to work out a trade agreement where sugar and fruits from Hawaii wouldn't have tariffs imposed on it. Well, guys, this made tons of Americans move out there because that was cold, hard money. Indeed, some of the missionary families that were out in Hawaii said, you know what? I think that instead of being a missionary, I'm going to grow sugar and fruit. And one of those missionary families, and I wonder if any of y'all have seen their products on the shelves, was Dole. Y'all ever seen like Dole pineapple, Dole? Anyway, they were one of them bars. What? There you go. While American immigrants continue to come over there, so many that by 1877 they forced the king to basically write a constitution and begin a constitutional monarchy. And even though the king that same year, 1877, is caught red-handed taking bribes from opium sales, we don't really care because, yeah, he's a good guy. Ready for the next one? New expansions. In 1871, we tried to do to Korea what we had done to Japan. We basically land a force of 1,320 Marines who take over 2 different forts. And by 1882, Korea goes ahead and opens up trade to America. In 1899, the Samoan Islands are of real interest to the U.S., Britain, and Germany. And basically everybody sends, those 3 nations send naval ships there. And there's almost a standoff, but then a typhoon hits and it spreads out the fleet, damaging some vessels, sinking others. That led to calmer heads. Ready for the next slide? Now, why in the 1890s is America all of a sudden interested in expanding? You know, we've been cool to be by ourselves for so long. Well, first off, remember, the U.S. Census announcing there's no more frontier in 1890 freaked a lot of people out. And, you know, we have that whole fear of the closing frontier. So we got to go out, we got to go out, we got to find it. Also, the economic depression of 1893 convinced a lot of people, you know what we need to do? We need to sell our goods to like other countries. So, because if we had all these different countries that were buying our goods, then if we have a little economic hiccup here, it won't be felt as bad because we're selling our goods to other nations. So it won't be as bad as the Depression of 1893. Then, of course, you also got to admit that America had a missionary impulse. Basically, we wanted to spread Christianity and democracy throughout the world. Now, does America still have a missionary impulse? Do we? Does America as a nation really want to spread Christianity? No, probably. Democracy? Guys, that's why we still got troops in Afghanistan. That's why we had troops in Iraq. That's why we had troops in Germany. That's why we still have troops in Japan. Basically, we'll go over there, provide a stable environment for democracy to take root. And it's cool, we'll pull out. Now, naval, if we're going to expand, we need a strong Navy. And guys, that's one thing we do not have. Basically, since the Civil War, no real money had been spent on the Navy. It was said the only good use for the wooden ships was firewood. Indeed, a coal barge had hit one of our naval vessels, and a congressman joked that our Navy was too slow to even get out of the way. Now, the president of the Naval War College in Annapolis, Alfred Thayer Mann, he said that the key to a strong nation was a strong merchant marine. I mean, this guy had given lectures, he published articles, books, including the Still, looked at the influence of sea power upon history from 1600 to 1789. He said what made a nation great was a strong merchant marine. And merchant marines are basically at cargo vessels. So wait a minute. If merchant marine is so great, then where does the Navy fall into place? Well, you need something to protect the naval vessels. So, you need a strong Navy. And indeed, at this time, the Secretary of the Navy in 1889, the Secretary of the Navy, Benjamin F. Tracy, urged Congress to modernize the Navy and expand it. He wanted 18 more battleships built, up from the 2 we already had, nearly 50 more cruisers, and even more smaller vessels. And even though Congress didn't approve on it, it did approve on building a modern Navy centered on battleships. And of course, one also can't get over the fact that, because social Darwinism was around then, it seemed to justify us having a big, strong Navy because we could. Which kind of showed an Anglo-Saxon superiority. You ready? Now, flexing of American power. Out in Hawaii, King Kaluka's daughter, Queen Liliuokalani, ascended to the throne in 1891. And she was, as a ruler, she thought her dad had given away too much stuff to the Americans. Indeed, she wanted Hawaii for Hawaiians. And kind of a legacy of that today is, how many of you guys would like to own a house in Hawaii? Got one, okay. Well, if you went and you bought a house in Hawaii, you really only own it for 99 years. Unless you marry a native of Hawaii and then put it all in her name. Because if it's theirs, then they get to keep it in perpetuity. But if you're just a traveler, 99 years. Well, so a lot of the Americans that were living out there started talking about revolution. Now, what some people point out is the real reason why they wanted a revolution may have nothing to do with Queen Liliuokalani. Rather, in 1890, the McKinley Tariff was passed that took away the tariff-exempt status of all the fruits and agricultural products from Hawaii that was hurting them financially. So basically, they plot to overthrow the Queen. They begin the revolution, and the American ambassador to Hawaii, John L. Stevens, gives the rebels 150 Marines to supplement their forces. And with these Marines, they basically force the Queen to get off the throne. And they work out annexation papers, they send them to the U.S., they're getting ready to present it to Congress, and all of a sudden the president learns of the role of the Marines. And he said, whoa, Hawaiians, no cool. You gotta put the Queen back in power. And basically the people that were over there said, no, ain't gonna happen, sorry. We'll be a republic until basically you guys annex us. Bye, see you later. That didn't happen until 1951, 59. Ready for the next one? Meanwhile, down in Chile, there'd been a revolution there. And basically the people rebelled throughout the old government. Well, America, being America, told the old government in exile, hey, you can come to the American embassy, we'll give you safety. Well, the Chileans aren't cool with that at all. And in October, a boatload of American sailors goes there, goes to town, gets drunk, and a mob of Chileans attacks them, and basically they get back to the boat. Well, America isn't happy about that. We say, you better apologize and pay damages. And Chile said, oh, what? We're not going to do it. And then America said, oh, really? Well, we're going to blockade your harbors. How about that? And Chile said, okay, we're sorry. Here's some money. Doesn't make them like us a lot. Ready to go to the next one? And it's into the centrifuge that Teddy Roosevelt arises. Guys, you ask, does the man make the times? Does the time make the man's? I mean, yeah, does the man make the time or do the times make the man? With Teddy Roosevelt, I mean, this guy is an American bull. I got no idea. They both coincided and worked well together. Now, if you knew Teddy back when he was born, uh-oh, it's too loud. Boom, 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 boom. Do, 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 do. Oh. All right, close enough for government work. All right. Like I said, when he was born, you wouldn't have known this from sight. He was born October 27th, 1858, and he is an incredibly sickly child. Thin, anemic. His dad would have to stay up late at night, patting him on the back to loosen the phlegm that had collected in his lungs, to knock out the mucus and everything like that. Basically, his father developed a physical regime that would strengthen his body. He paired that with an academic regime that would strengthen his mind, and Teddy took to it like a duck takes to water. Now you ready to see our president that looked the most like a young Wolverine? Yeah. There we go. That's he was on the boxing team at Harvard, where he won the Golden Gloves and everything like that. Like I said, he went to Harvard, where he graduated from at 20. He marries Alice Hathaway Lee. Now, Alice Hathaway Lee, yeah, she came from a rich New York family. Yeah, Teddy's from a rich New York family. But she was like gorgeous. She was the ideal politician's wife. All right, and he knew that exactly. For their honeymoon, they go to Europe, and what does he do on his honeymoon with his beautiful wife? He goes and he climbs the highest mountain in Europe, the Matterhorn. He comes back, and at 23, he runs to be in the New York State Assembly, which he wins, making him still the youngest assemblyman in the history of the New York Assembly. He writes and publishes The Naval War of 1812, a book that is ordered to be on every U.S. naval vessel. He buys a ranch in the Dakotas, and the story is he goes out there, you know, it's winter, and it's kind of dusk, getting to be night, and he goes into the hotel, goes up to the bar, asks for a warm cup of coffee. And of course, a cowhand is there at the bar, laughs at him, makes fun of him, that's not a man's drink. And so then they go outside to have a fight, and Teddy Roosevelt just gives him one big uppercut right on the jaw, and bam, knocks the guy out, totally. He went on numerous safaris, including 2 trips here to Texas. One hunt javelina, the other to hunt wolves, where he met a gruff Texas Ranger, was his chaperone, who wanted to make sure that he paid for everything. And he just kind of fell in love with the whole cowboy. Ready for the next one? Yes. Well, then we hit the dark period. Has to do with Valentine's Day. Now, the day had started out normal enough. They were at the hospital. He was there to witness the birth of his daughter. Except instead he witnessed the death of his wife. She died in childbirth. The child was okay though. He had many children. Well, you know, that kind of chokes him up, so he goes home, and 2 hours later he gets a telegraph telling him that his mom, Maria, had died of typhoid fever that same day. Well, that kind of takes the wind out of your sails, but he continues, he goes on, and he runs to be mayor of New York City, and on November 2nd, 1896, the results are in, he lost. Now guys, like I told you, Teddy Roosevelt came from wealth, all right? He could have said, you know what, I had a nice go of it, I'm just gonna kind of relax now and just be cool. But guys, Teddy doesn't do that. And guys, life is gonna knock you down. It's not how many times life's gonna knock you down, rather it's how many times you're gonna stand back up. And this is when we get into a little bit of Roosevelt's past. Had to do with his salvation. Now why is that? Because it has to do with a girl. Edith Carroll. Now, Edith was a friend of Teddy's sister. And Teddy was her friend too. I mean, they had a great time growing up. Had lots of laughs, but Teddy knew that she liked him more than a friend and wanted to be more than friends. And he knew he was going to be a politician. And I mean, Edith, she might have a great personality, but she's not a politician's wife. So before he left to Harvard, he told his, because he's not a jerk. So he told his sister, he says, listen, I know the way Edith feels about me. Whenever I come back to the family home, I'm going to tell you when my training is supposed to be here. And I want her out of the house 30 minutes before I get back. So she says, okay, no problem. Well, and Edith, meanwhile, she holds that torch aloft for Teddy. She's totally convinced she's going to be Teddy Roosevelt's wife. Even when he marries Alice, she's like, nope, he's going to be my husband one of these days. Well, Teddy's sister and her were talking. Time kind of slipped by without him noticing. All of a sudden, she looks up at the clock. Oh my gosh, I've only got 15 minutes to get you out of here. And so she gets everything together. So they start rushing towards the front door. Little did they know, Teddy's train made great time. He got into town 15 minutes early. So he's on his way to the house. They're on the way to the door. His sister goes, or Edith goes to grab the handle. When it opens, and there's Teddy. And it's like two old friends seeing each other again. His heart warms up. They get married. After that, he has several books and articles published. And guys, when you were at the top and you've fallen, you're not going to go back at the top again. You're going to have to work your way up. So, his position that he worked his way up from was the president of the Board of New York Police Commissioners. Basically, this was for New York City, and he totally reformed the organization. I mean, they used to not have all the same uniforms. Used to be the cops would carry whatever gun they wanted to work. No, now everybody's going to have the same uniform. We're all going to have the same sidearm issue to make it more efficient in getting all the ammunition and all that stuff. He told his policemen, I want you to walk your beats personally, and I want you to know the people on your beats, which is the area of the patrols that they would make by foot every day. And the reason why he did that is because he wanted the people, a job's duty is to protect and serve. And if these people see you as a threat, they're not going to come to you if they feel in danger. And like I told you, Teddy Roosevelt would actually go out and walk the beats with these guys. Indeed, there's one story about one New York City cop that his beat was New York City docks. He worked from midnight to 7 in the morning. Well, he was tired, so he pulled up a chair, leaned against the wall, and was falling asleep. And all of a sudden, this figure comes out of the fog and walks over, kicks out the chair from underneath the cop, grabs the cop up by his lapel, pulls him up, and it's Teddy Roosevelt, who then they go and they walk the beat. Well, he did such a good job at reforming the police that he gets an opportunity to become Assistant Secretary of the Navy in April of 1897, and he serves until May of 1898. Now, that was a crucial position at a crucial time. Why? because America's getting ready to Cuba Libre, or the splendid little war. Cuba Libre means free Cuba. And the war is the Spanish-American War. Everybody got it? So, now guys, there have been tons of tensions with Spain. All right, Spain, which used to have this huge empire over here in America, well, now it had been whittled and meted out into where its last big colonial thing it had, I mean, it had Puerto Rico, but it had Cuba. And the people of Cuba did not like being a colony of Spain anymore. They wanted their own independence. Now you had these yellow journalists that were out there. Yellow journalist was somebody who liked this sensational story rather than it being truthful. You know, they like, ooh, and Teddy Roosevelt called them muckrakers because all they did was went out and rake up the muck because they weren't looking for truth at all. And they were called yellow journalists because the paper that they would print their newspaper on was so cheap it would oxidize within 2 hours of it being printed and turn yellow. Now, can y'all think of any stories where at first, you know, it seemed very sensational, but then when you get to the truth, it's kind of the exact opposite? Can any of y'all think of news stories like that? Well, I know there are some news stories, like this one lady talked about how people had broken into her house and how they had taken her 2 little boys. I think she was from somewhere around this area. Anyway, and everyone was like, oh! And then when they looked into it and the actual truth comes out, she put her own kids into the van and killed them. Oh. Yeah. Also, y'all remember the Smollett, Jesse Smollett? That happened like a year or 2 ago, maybe. Anyway, Jesse Smollett was an actor, black actor, that was on the show Empire. He was in Chicago. It was 2 in the morning, and he'd gone to a Subway for food. Now, as you guys don't know, Chicago is a deep, 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 deep Democrat city. Anyway, when he comes back to the hotel, he has a noose around his neck, and he smells like bleach. And he tells whoever was there, he said that he was grabbed by 2 big white guys and said, welcome to MAGA country. You know, make America great again. And they put that noose around his neck. Oh, and he calls, oh, America, oh, we're so great. Well, guys, guess what he forgot? A little something called surveillance cameras. And it wasn't white guys. It was his 2 bodyguards from the Dominican Republic that were black that he had hired that did that. And needless to say, there was a lot of backtracking, especially by the people that were, oh, America's got a problem with race. But the good thing is that stuff kind of gets undone. Well, anyway, these yellow journalists were printing out stories about all of the bad things the Spanish soldiers were doing to the natives. And I mean, some of them may have been true, but, you know, and you had women that were had escaped from Cuba and were coming over here talking about how the soldiers were doing assaults on them and everything, and building up a lot of emotion against Spain. Needless to say, American sugar investors and interests in Cuba are also very concerned because they're making good money and they don't want their businesses hurt. Meanwhile, you do have you've got little rebellions breaking out in Spain. You know, they're blowing up bridges, they're killing soldiers. So what's going to happen? Well, Spain gets the idea. They send a guy by the name of General Valeriano, the Butcher Wire, who's going to take care of this problem. Basically, what he figured out is that he's going to set up detention camps all over Cuba. and basically make people from the surrounding villages go and move into these detention camps during the night. And in the day, they can go out and work in the fields and everything. But when nighttime comes, they have to be back in the detention camps. Now, how is that going to help out the Spanish? Well, if it's nighttime and a Spanish soldier sees a Cubano and they're not in a detention camp, are they a good Cuban or a bad Cuban? They're a bad Cuban. Because all the Cubans have been told you got to move into these camps. And there's all these camps over there. So it seems like it's a good idea on paper. In reality, these things were so quickly set up, doesn't have proper sanitation, anything like that. You have 100,000 die of exposure, sickness, disease. So America is really looking down on this. When you have February 15th, 1898. The USS Maine was a battleship that was in Havana Harbor as a sign of American strength and military power, and early in the morning it blows up. You can see the newspaper printing there of the explosion of the Maine. More than 260 American sailors died. Okay, Pulitzer and Hirsch say it was a Spanish mine, and this was done deliberately. Now, this is the way they printed it. This is an actual photo of the Maine taken by the harbor master in Havana, who ordered his men to send lifeboats out to the site to try to help the survivors. And 70 years after this happened, the U.S. actually sent divers to investigate the wreck of the Maine and say, here's the wall of the Maine, here's the inside of the ship, out here is the water. If it was a mine out here, you'd expect the walls of the ship to be blown in, right? Well, they weren't. They were blown out. Meaning that it was an explosion on board that sunk the Maine. And what they theorize is that the class of vessel that the Maine was in that battleship, they kept all the munitions or all the shells and everything like that right next to the boilers. So maybe there was something that happened there. Anyway, even though our president is trying to say, hey guys, calm down, we need to think about this, Congress goes ahead on April 11th, 1898, and declares war on Spain. Now, guys, just talking about images like this one of the Maine, and our battle cry was "Remember the Maine." Do images do a good job of provoking America to war? Well, oh, there's Pearl Harbor. That's 9/11. Both those were published, and we went to war soon after. Ooh, no. Ready to go to the next slide? Huzzah! All right. Well, Teddy was prepared for this thing. During his service as the Secretary of the Navy, he anticipated conflict with Spain and built up the naval coal reserves. He ordered Commodore Dewey to the Pacific, or in the Pacific, to head towards Manila Bay in the Philippines should war occur. He did, and on May 1st, 1868, in the first engagement of the Spanish-American War, Dewey's guns opened fire, sinking the entire Spanish squadron at Manila. So he destroyed all their ships, all their sailors are gone. You know how many Americans died? Not one. He died of a heat stroke. So guys, always drink your water, take your salt pills if necessary. Then, the first thing Teddy does is he quits the Navy. After he quits the Navy, he crosses the street to go to Brooke Brothers, where he has designed a cavalry suit for him because he wants to start a cavalry regiment. This cavalry regiment would be known as the Rough Riders. And recruits were a fine combination of cowboys and Ivy League students. And he went down to the Menger Hotel in San Antonio to do his recruiting. He can still go to the Menger down in San Antonio. And the cavalry units practiced at the fairgrounds in San Antonio as well as at Fort Sam Houston. Ready for the next slide? So Teddy's ready, but the country isn't. Our country is always caught by surprise when we go to war. Well, even though it's much less so after 1945 since we've had a standing army. Anyway, he trains with all his unit. So it's a cavalry unit. The Rough Riders are supposed to be on horses when the trains come to take them to Florida. They don't have any horse trains, just cars for the men. So what does Teddy Roosevelt do? He orders that all the benches be taken out of the trains. And when that happens, they only have enough space for the officers' horses. So all the soldiers had to ride on top of the railroad cars all the way out to Florida. They get there, they load up all the horses, and they are on their way to Cuba. Here's Santiago. Oh, wait a minute, I'll take it off that. Just remember, here's where they're landing. Because y'all be distracted by not only the music, but trying to write down things. Oops, wrong way, wrong way. So they take all the men over to land by lifeboats and everything like that. Well, what are you going to do about the horses? Because you don't have a harbor you can go into. What are you going to do with the horses? What can horses do? Dogs can do it. Cats can do it, even though cats don't like to. A lot of animals can do it.
Swim?
Yeah, swim. So they start, pushing the horse off the sides of the boat. And all the horses go down the water. And they swim away from the island. When they're all swimming away, it's at this time that Teddy Roosevelt lifts his pistol in the air, shoots, and his horse, which was named Texas, turns around and comes to him. Because apparently his horse was trained to come to gunfire. Well, anyway, they land. He's the only guy on his horse. He loves talking to the press with his stories, bragging up, everything like that. At Santiago, the highest point of elevation is San Juan Hill. So he and his Rough Riders that are all on foot, with the help of the 9th and 10th Colored Infantry, basically take San Juan Hill, which the highest point, all you have to do is get artillery up there. Well, the next morning, the Spanish forces respond by starting up their navy and getting ready to go out, but the U.S. fleet is there blocking them off, and basically we wipe out the whole Spanish fleet from Santiago. Ready for the next one? Okay, well, battles go on. Basically, we win, and what are we going to do about it? In that treaty, we get the Philippines, we get Puerto Rico, we get Guam. What are we going to do about Cuba? Well, that was tricky, because Cuba, the whole reason why we went to war is because we said that Cuba needed to be free. And so it really wouldn't be right if we took it over. So we gave Cuba to the people of Cuba, and we're like, there you go, you've got your independence. But according to the Platt Amendment, we kept a tiny little slice of Cuba. Does anybody know around what bay is the American... Oh, and by the way, we also said in the Platt Amendment that anytime we want to, we can go in and take over from the government and put in a new government, but we'll leave. Does anybody know what the little bay that America, and we still own it. We have horses in Cuba, in this little area. Huh? No, you kind of got it. Where do we keep the prisoners of the Taliban? Guantanamo. Guantanamo Bay. And that's also where the Taliban prisoners just happen to be. But that's a part of America. Well, what is America going to do? We're very uneasy with this. By the way, the Philippines, we're also very uneasy about that. We make it a protectorate of the United States. But it's going to get its freedom eventually, even though we totally keep Guam and Puerto Rico. And we pretty much decide that we want to be an empire based on trade, not of actual physical possession. Ready for the next slide? Now the Philippine War. All right, guys, this is another place where America gets in trouble. Because we just do. Basically, Spain owned all the Philippines. And when we landed there, there was a Philippine insurrectionist who had been fighting against the Spanish, just like there had been insurrectionists fighting against Spain in Cuba, by the name of Emilio Allende. And we told Emilio, hey, you and me, we're going to fight this thing together. Yeah, you're going to win your freedom. Yeah. And so we go and we attack. We take over, well, we're laying siege to Manila when we get word that the garrison commandant, the Spanish commander of the garrison, wants to have a meeting. So we go. And we say we're going to bring Emilio. They say, no, do not bring Emilio. And we say, okay. So we go there. So the Spanish commandant tells us, okay, guys, tell you what, you surrender to me. And we said, well, wait a minute. We'll surrender to you without a shot being fired. And we said, great, well, let's go get Emilio. And they said, no, we will only surrender to you. We will not admit defeat to that guy. If you call him in and have him sign the papers as well, the battle's going to go on. So the American commander says, okay, and accepts their surrender. But that makes the Filipinos mad at us. Insurrection. Basically, like I told you, when we were in the Philippines, they were fighting for their freedom just like Cuba was. And basically, the commander of the Spanish garrison said that he'd surrender to us, but not to the Filipino Emilio Aguinaldo, who was incredibly popular over there. And because we want to put an end to the bloodshed, we go ahead and we agree to that. Well, the Filipinos don't like that, especially the rebels. So, of course, they continue to fight. And to help pacify the countryside, basically one lieutenant had an idea of using like a local tribe called the Moro, and he would pay them for enemy rifles that they would bring back, and basically that pacified the area. Well, his commander saw that that worked, so he decided to go ahead and expand it throughout the Philippines and to members of other tribes. Because, and this was a very good start with self-government, because basically the Philippines had no experience with self-government. And indeed, the Philippine Scouts were kind of trained by the U.S. Army, and it was a Filipino scout that won the Medal of Honor when he stayed at his artillery post during World War II and was firing at the Japanese, slowing their advance as the American and Filipino troops were evacuated. Ready for the next one? Hoorah! All right, citizens or subjects, what the heck are we going to do? Have y'all ever read the poem White Man's Burden? Basically, that whole poem was written about America and the Philippines. What are we going to do? Kind of democracy versus imperialism. What were some of the results of it? Well, the results were the Foraker Act of 1900. What are we going to do with Puerto Rico? Well, we made Puerto Rico an insular territory of the United States. That could eventually become a state. And Puerto Rico, unlike a lot of other places of the Spanish colonies, actually did have some experience with self-government. Hawaii finally did become a state in 1959, and by 1946, basically the Philippines gained their independence and were no longer a protectorate of the United States. Ready for the next one? Time for a change. Okay, basically we're with Teddy Roosevelt, along with him, we're starting to go into a new America, where the progressive politics that, like the Farmers Alliance had started, well, that's moving out of the rural areas and into the cities. Well, why are they going to the cities? Because that's where there is a huge population growth with our industrialization. Indeed, from 1901 to 1913, more than 13 million immigrants come to our shores. Now, why did they come here? Well, not only the pull of industrial expansion, but also the promise of plenty. Indeed, one immigrant said, "We were told that in America, the streets were paved with gold. When we got here, we found out that the streets weren't paved with gold. In fact, the streets weren't even paved, and they expected us to pave them." Now, what are some of the effects of industrialization? Well, first off, you start to have department stores, where it used to be if you wanted to get like a men's clothes, you had to go to a haberdasher, or a men's clothier. If you wanted to get a lady's hat, you had to go to a milliner. If you wanted chocolates, you'd have to go to a chocolatier. Now they put all of those things in the same store. Also, you have chain stores, because our transportation infrastructure is getting better and better, where the Sears in Chicago carries pretty much what the Sears in New York does. Kind of like the Sears in San Diego. And the internet, before the internet, mail order business, basically Sears pioneered in that. Where you didn't even have to go to the store. All you had to do is look at their catalog and order stuff through the catalog. You could even order a whole house that you had to build yourself, but you could order that through Sears. And more America has the promise of abundance, which we still do today. Ready for the next one? All right, now also there's a progressive want to humanize labor. And of course, this is very socialist. One of the biggest socialists was Eugene V. Debs. You're actually going to be reading a clip from one of his speeches, where he says war sucks because basically it's old men, young men dying for old men's dreams, and the poor dying for the wealthy. Anyway, Eugene Debs, though, he was a guy that knew hard labor. I mean, at 14 years old, he left his house to work with the railways and worked his way up. And he indefatigably fought for the rights of the worker. He formed the International Workers of the World, or the IWW, that's also known as the Wobblies. And I mean, he was big into like healthcare. He wanted the workers to own the methods of production. And of course, competing labor union, the American Federation of Labor, would use people's fear of the IWW to make headway for the American Federation of Labor. You know, kind of like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would do with Malcolm X later on, where he'd say, hey, look, this is all we want. That guy is kind of crazy, but this is all we want. And he was actually like jailed 4 times for his beliefs. Ready to go to the next one? You also have this progressive push in government, where they view the government as an agency of change. For example, hey, people are dying or getting sick because of bad water. Well, let's put city government in charge of it, and we'll have a city water supply. Or the government overseeing the utility that provides water to the city. And it was believed that you could revive and reinvigorate democracy by giving more power to the people. Ready? Well, then President McKinley wants to run, and he wants to win in 1900. So he gets Teddy Roosevelt to be his vice president, because Teddy Roosevelt was incredibly popular. Like I told you, he loved talking to the reporters. The reporters loved writing about him. He was a very charismatic individual. And basically, McKinley hoped that he could use Teddy Roosevelt to get into the White House. Well, of course, and this was the Republican ticket, a lot of Republicans and business leaders thought this was crazy. Like Mark Hanna, a business tycoon, claimed, don't you realize there's but one heartbeat between the White House and this madman? Now, little did he know, it would actually come true that Teddy would be president. Ready? Why? Because McKinley attended the Pan American Exposition. That was kind of like a World's Fair in upstate New York that was totally lit by electricity, or at least things were. And also in attendance at that fair was Leon Colts. That's how you say his last name. And Leon Colts was an anarchist that may not have known much, but he knew he had to kill McKinley because he thought he was an enemy of the working man. Now McKinley was there a whole week, and Leon Colts made numerous attempts to kill him, but something always went wrong, or he chickened out. Then came the final night of the fair, when President McKinley was greeting everybody at the Temple of Music. That was the name of the music hall. And he was standing at the door and he was shaking everybody's hand as they went into the amphitheater. And Leon Colts basically got a pistol, wrapped his hand in a handkerchief, and when the president reached out to shake his hand, he pulled up his hand and shot the president in the gut. The president was immediately sent to the hospital where they searched for but couldn't find the bullet. I mean, even Alexander Graham Bell invented a machine that would help him find the bullet, but they never moved the president off his bed that was metal springs and everything like that. So anyway, and it looked like he was getting better. Like the day before he died, he felt pretty good. But what that probably was just a touch of grace, because he died the very next day, basically of gangrene. And they found it after he died. It had damaged part of his liver. For Colts, basically he was sentenced to the electric chair. There's not too many court sketches of him because he said anybody, if they wanted to make a sketch of him, they had to pay him $10. And this was back then money, and people were like, no thanks. So he's killed as well. Ready for the next one? And this is what allowed Teddy to ascend to the presidency. He basically felt it was the role of the president to be a steward of the public welfare. As president, he went after trusts and monopolies using the Sherman Antitrust Act, where it said that every contract, combination, in the form of a trust or otherwise, or conspiracy and restraint of trade or commerce among the several states is hereby declared illegal. And the first company he goes after is the Northern Securities Company, which basically was 3 railroads that kind of had a stranglehold over traffic in the Northwest. Ready for the next one? Then comes the Panama Canal. Now, have y'all ever heard of an anagram? A phrase that's the same backwards as it is forward. One of the longest anagrams is a man, a plan, a canal, Panama. If you read that backwards, a man, a plan. Ooh. Anyway, the Panama Canal was basically going to link the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through the tiny isthmus of Panama. Now, the canal company that originally built the Suez Canal was banking that it could do this. France had supported them, was paying for them to do it, but their workers kept getting sick from malaria, and it was just, the project was falling apart, so France wasn't interested anymore. We buy the rights to finish the canal from France, and just to make sure we don't hedge all our bets on this one canal, in Nicaragua they had a plan where they were going to have to, at the Atlantic, you pull into port, you'd have to unload your ship onto railroad cars. The railroad would take it up to Lake Maracaibo. They'd unload it from the railroads, load it onto the ship. It would go across Lake Maracaibo and then unload it onto railroad cars that would take it down, unload it from that, load it onto a ship. But that was the deal with Nicaragua. So we bought the rights from France. And then we had to get the rights from Colombia, because Panama was a state of Colombia. And we said, Colombia, this is what we're going to do. Tell you what, we're going to offer you $10 million. And every year we'll pay an annual rent of $250,000. Just give us the rights to do it. And Colombia said no. So we went to Panama City, the capital of Panama, the state of Panama. And we said, you know what, Panama? We offered Colombia $10 million and $250,000 every year rent just to build this canal. Boy, if you did it, Panama, we'd give you the same offer, but I don't know. Well, guess what? Panama goes ahead, they throw a revolution. We just happen to have the USS Nashville at Panama City to prevent a landing of Colombian troops. Panama wins the rebellion, and they sign the deal with us. Ready for the next one? Well, the canal is built over 70 years. In 1900, you have like a doctor that was in Brownsville basically figured out that mosquitoes carried malaria, and so they had like mosquito netting over the workers where they slept. They made sure they had quinine for like the marshy areas. This is very environmentally unsound today, but they just basically dumped kerosene on top of the swamps. Now, how would that kill off the mosquitoes? Y'all know what mosquito larvae does? This is why they tell you to dump over like buckets or things of standing water, because basically the mosquito larvae are born in water and they come up to just the surface of the water and they have a little like snorkel thing that they breathe through, they use the surface tension of the water to stay there and float. Well, if you cover it with kerosene, they're not going to be able to breathe. So it's going to kill off all the mosquitoes. And then, of course, once you're outside of that area, all you have to do is set it on fire, and bada bing, bada boom. Roosevelt visits the site, making him the first American president to travel abroad while in office. And within 10 years, the canal is serving more than 5,000 ships a year. Ready for the next slide? Next, Roosevelt moved against meat, oil, and tobacco trusts. Indeed, he prosecuted more trusts than had any other previous president. The anthracite coal miners had gone on strike because they wanted $8 a day. And the company said, we ain't gonna do it. So they called a strike, and because of that, the coal supply started to dwindle. Now, the deal about anthracite coal, because it burnt so clean and it burnt so hot, it's kind of like super premium gas. And if they're not making any gas, cars aren't going to be able to get around. Well, schools and hospitals could only be open like half day because coal supplies were getting so short. This prompts Roosevelt to tell the company that they need to solve this difficulty, and if the company is unable to do it, he's going to move in the troops of the United States of America and force the mines to open back up again. Roosevelt warned the owners. This is the first president that was for the working man. Ready for the next one? Second term. In his second term, Roosevelt promised the American people that he'd deliver a square deal. I shall see to it that every man has a square deal, no less and no more. Now, The Jungle, a book by Upton Sinclair, had just come out, and it's basically from an immigrant's point of view, and it talks about the horrors inside a meat processing plant. Like the workers would sweep into the meat vats dead rats and other things they found around. There's one immigrant worker who goes missing one day, and it's kind of inferred by the book that he fell into a vat of meat and they were just selling him. And also, when Roosevelt was in the Spanish-American War, he knew that there were more casualties from food poisoning than there was from battle. So basically, he wanted to set health and safety standards for our food industry. So he passed the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 that prohibited dangerous dyes, chemicals, and filth contaminating food. And to kind of show economically how much more commerce was going on between the states, the Hepburn Act, which blocked unreasonable freight rates, was enforced by the Interstate Commerce Commission. Ready for the next one? Environmentally, basically he got together with conversationalist John Muir to preserve our wilderness. Basically, Roosevelt wanted to balance the use of our nation's resources and slow the destruction of forests. You know, have some places that were left pristine. Now, there already had been national parks created, but Teddy Roosevelt, I mean, these were tiny little things. Teddy Roosevelt like went huge and funding our national park system. And then he chooses that his successor is going to be his Secretary of State, William Howard Taft, who, by the way, is the fattest president we've ever had. They had to build him a special bathtub. And Taft didn't want to be president. He wanted to be a Supreme Court justice, but his wife said, "You're going to be president." "Okay, I'll be president." Ready for the next one? In foreign policy, why is America now in Afghanistan? Why were we in Iraq? Why does it seem like we go to all these hot spots in the world? Guys, blame Teddy Roosevelt. He says that basically America should act as the policeman of the West. Now, he did this in regards to Venezuela, because Venezuela was having difficulty paying off its debts, and he was basically warning European countries, you don't mess around in the Western Hemisphere. He adds the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, which gave us the right to exercise international police power over Latin America. This opportunity came with the Dominican Republic because it was so deep in debt. Basically, they worked out a deal that all of their tariffs, basically the government of the Dominican Republic would get 45% of the taxes. The other 55% would just go to pay off their debts. And then remember, we also wanted to keep the Chinese market open to everybody. Well, the problem with this was that both Russia as well as Japan had their eyes on the resource-rich province of Manchuria. And Japan, in a surprise torpedo attack, basically struck the Russian fleet in 1904. Oh, yeah. And totally destroyed their Pacific fleet. Well, then Russia calls over their Atlantic fleet, which is also destroyed by Japan, making them the first Eastern nation to be victorious over a European power. Well, Roosevelt sits down to work peace between the two countries, and this, in combination with his work he did, trying to think of the other thing that was folded in. Maybe it was the Dominican Republic, but that won him the Nobel Peace Prize. So he was the first president to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And also of interest is he was awarded a Congressional Medal of Honor, or a Military Medal of Honor, by Bill Clinton. So he won our highest peace prize, or the world's highest peace prize, and he won America's biggest war prize recognition. Good old Teddy. Now, in foreign diplomacy, well, from December of 1907 to February of 1909, a fleet of 16 battle vessels, not including the torpedo boats and auxiliary ships, go out and circumnavigate the globe. He has all these ships painted bright white. He made more than 20 ports of call. Now, why in the world are you going to paint battleships white? Because that's kind of an easy color to see, right? Why would you paint battleships white? Because you want people to see them. He's basically showing America's power. He's going out to all these different countries and different ports to kind of show, hey, look at what we got, walk softly but carry a big stick. This is our big stick. But what is so funny is that this thing that was kind of out to show how strong America's military was, as we're going through the Mediterranean, there's an earthquake that hits Italy. So our ships are actually used to help evacuate the wounded and to take care of the casualties. Y'all got it? Well, then you get Taft. He really goes after Truss. Indeed, he takes down more Truss than Teddy Roosevelt did. And not only is he big on trust busting, but he also set up a Department of Labor. He passed a graduated income tax, meaning those who have more money pay more taxes. He set child labor laws. He set regulations for unsafe workplaces and the railroads. He set an 8-hour workday. He increased civil service jobs. He did all this stuff, and nobody really knew. Because unlike Teddy Roosevelt, he had absolutely no flair for publicity. Ready for the next one. So what does Teddy do in the meantime when he's not being president? Well, he goes out on a lot of safaris, and there's even one where he's on a hunting expedition in Australia. They kill a koala bear, but there's like the baby koala bear that Teddy Roosevelt, kind of adopts. He picks it up, and a cartoonist, a political cartoonist, does a drawing of it, of Teddy holding this bear, and he calls it Teddy's Bear. Well, a toy maker said, hey, that's a great idea. That's how we got teddy bears, from Theodore Roosevelt. But as he's doing all this stuff, he used to be president. Now, how many times can you be president? Okay. But that first term doesn't count, because I wasn't voted in as president. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to be president. I can be president again, because it wasn't voted on. So he comes back to the Republican Party and he says, hey, how's it going, guys? I'll be your president. And the Republicans, who, by the way, didn't like Teddy Roosevelt because he was such a reformer, they said, we've already got Taft, and Taft is doing well. And he goes, no, but the people want me. And they said, no, we're not going to support you being a candidate for president. So he said, fine, I'll go start my own political party. And he starts the Bull Moose Party. And he goes out and he goes electioneering at all these places. Now, guys, how many of y'all know that smoking can actually save your life? Do y'all know that smoking can save your life? Well, it did for Teddy Roosevelt. He was getting ready to give a speech at this place. He gets out of the wagon, and he's coming up, and a guy shoots him. Wants to assassinate him. Shoots him right in the heart. Well, it goes through his jacket. It goes through his about 45 pages of little note cards for his speech. It goes through that. Goes through the part of his cigarette case. Goes through the cigarette. Goes through the other side of his cigarette case. But by that time the bullet's been slowed down dramatically, and it pierces the skin, but it doesn't go in very deep. I mean, it's really bloody. And the guys that are with him say, oh my gosh, we gotta get you to a hospital. He says, what are you talking about? I feel fine. This is great. And after about 20, he's 20 minutes late, he gets on the stage and goes, hi everybody, sorry I'm late, but they tried to kill me. And he opens up his jacket, and there's this bloody shirt. He goes, it takes more than that to stop a bull moose. And everyone, ah! Now, how many of y'all would like to have like one of those note cards that, with a bullet hole in it? Well, he gave them out after his speech. Vote for Teddy, vote for Teddy, vote for Teddy. And so there are some in some museums because they were able to get them. But anyway, that's just kind of guy he was. And was it worth it? Well, it did a really good job of splitting the Republican ticket, where Teddy Roosevelt got 27.5% of the vote, Taft got 23% of the vote, and the Democratic candidate who only got 43% of the vote, Woodrow Wilson, won the election. Because basically the Republicans had shot themselves in the foot. And Wilson, by the way, is the first Democrat, the first Southern Democrat that had been president of the United States since the Civil War. And he kind of wanted to out Teddy. Because Teddy had done all this, remember, won the Nobel Prize. He'd worked out all these agreements. And some things that Teddy Roosevelt said, which were cool. He said a lot of really cool stuff. But, like, the unforgivable crime is soft hitting. Do not hit at all if it can be avoided, but never hit softly. No man is above the law and no man below it. If there is only one quality worse than the hardness of heart, and that is the softness of head. And this last one is for you guys, just because of education. A man who has never gone to school may steal from a freight car. But if he has a university education, he may steal the whole railroad. And that's the truth, Ruth.